We're wrapping up the year, it's in December, and it's time to start constructing some lists. And it's time for the best albums of 2023 from the metal department. Think of me right now as a traveling merchant that set up my bazaar with all of my fine wares that I have dug up from the underground and the mainstream. I'm going to bestow them upon you for the ripe price of free, but the only thing that I ask for in exchange is your list, so you have to open up your little bazaar too and tell me what records or record means the most to you this year and why. There's a lot of records here I feel like a lot of people aren't aware came out this year or even exist, and I'm super excited to put them on your guys' radar. I've focused much more this year on doing video essays, philosophy type videos, and discussion stuff, but I've been listening to a lot of music this year and I want to share some of my favorites with you guys. So without further ado, let's get into the best metal records of 2023 and my own personal opinion that goes without saying. Starting off with number 15, Ahab with the Coral Tombs, coming out of Germany. Ahab continue to be one of the absolute best funeral doom metal bands that you're gonna find, making some of the highest quality dirge-like funeral doom metal that you're gonna hear. It's morbid, it's eerie, it's ominous. I don't think this record is going to particularly change the game, nor do I think it is the best output from Ahab, but it's still one of those experiences that scratches a certain itch that very few bands or records are going to be able to scratch this year for you. Next up, Iniquitous Barbaric Synthesis from the band Impetuous Ritual. That is a tongue twister. So this is made up of some members of Portal prior to them joining Portal, as well as some ties to some other bands. And the reason I love this record so much on release, and I feel like it has only grown on me since, is just how dense and impenetrable the mix is. It's genius to me how this is a fairly straightforward death doom record, but the mix makes it feel towering and colossal. It gives it so much grit and so much bite to it, creating this choking feeling that pulls you in and doesn't let go. This is a fast-paced chug fest, and it also kind of has that experimental quality of Portal in a way. You can definitely see the influence of the playing of Portal on this record. It's just a little bit more accessible, so if Portal maybe is a little bit too off the beaten path for you, but you like the general ideas, I think Impetuous Ritual might be the answer to that. Next up, I gotta give a shout out to Terracite by Cattle Decapitation. I think this is a perfectly fine and serviceable follow-up to Death Atlas. I think Death Atlas succeeded more for making it cataclysmic, making it so end-of-the-worldy, and I do eventually want to do an entire video on Death Atlas because I think it's a perfect record conceptually. I think Terracite builds on that foundation in the most logical direction it possibly could, and following the footsteps and trajectory of what they have been building since Monolith of Inhumanity was probably a very steep climb, but not only did they succeed in it, they continue to pump out these viscerally technical death grind riffs. Travis Ryan always explores his range like a fucking vocal acrobatic chameleon that just is always discovering new little raw corners of his vocal techniques to create these labyrinths of vocal styles that just interweave with each other like some sort of weird fucking snake. It's hellish, it's monstrous, it has that misanthropic style, it's very cynical, and it's everything you expect from Cattle Decapitation. And while they are playing it a little bit safe and inoffensive by their own standards, it's one of those things where they've set the bar so high that anytime they release material, it's gonna hit like a ton of bricks regardless. Those of you that have been following the channel for many years will know that I put a band on the map to the best of my ability by the name of Omega Infinity, and I said that they had great promise and potential with members from Germany and Australia, and they released a record this year that blew me away by the name of The Anti-Current. They are a black metal band, a black and death metal band with a cosmic twist to it, and it kind of baffles me that with so many bands doing this cosmic black metal style, Omega Infinity find a way to make it so atmospheric and beautifully haunting. This record isn't really traditionally pretty, but it has a certain texture to it that is just very addictive to listen to. I thought these guys had a ton of potential when they burst on the scene, and I am happy that it paid off here. I think this is a wonderful little record to check out and provides a pretty unique listening experience for the year that you're not going to get from many other records in the underground or mainstream. Reality Rotten to the Core by Fester Decay, coming out of Japan. I don't know what they're putting in the water there in Japan or what drugs they're taking, but the gore grind and just grind scenes in that side of the world right now, it's popping off amazingly. This is out on Everlasting Spirit few records, which of course it is, I am insanely impressed by how they perform gore grind. They're a fairly new band and there isn't much known about them, so I can't really go into much information regarding them because it's very anonymous and we don't know if they have like ties to other bands or if this is like a side project or whatever. But what I do know is this is one of the most straightforward but groovy and heavy gore grind records you will hear. It is so catchy for being such an extreme record, and even though you're still getting the pitch shifted sort of watery, gurgly gore grind vocals, they're surprisingly more intelligible and more hard-hitting than you typically get from a lot of the really over-the-top bands. And while I am not a huge fan of how a lot of gore grind and grindcore just play for speed and play for intensity and play for shock factor, this band really does feel like they are cohesively making tracks that function as listening experiences, and while they are extreme, they still have technicality, they still have riffs behind it, they still have a great mix backing it, and all of these songs are fairly long by gore grind and grindcore standards, and that was a welcome surprise because they're definitely taking a lot more of the death metal isms than the grindcore isms and playing it slow, but when they do speed up, it can be pretty damn intense. I would suggest this record for people that want to get into gore grind and don't know where to start with modern stuff, or don't typically like gore grind but want to give something a listen that I think is a little bit more accessible than the average gore grind release. I don't think it's nearly as off-putting or grotesque as many other bands try to be, which is not a diss to them at all, and in fact it's a compliment because I think when a lot of bands just try to go for shock factor alone, they miss the mark on quality. Dying of Everything by Obituary is number 10. I don't think I really need to give much introduction to Obituary. There have been some great classic records released this year by a variety of classic death metal bands, whether you're looking at Autopsy, Obituary, Cannibal Corpse. The reason I settled on Obituary, and this is the honest to God truth, is I just enjoyed this record straight up more than I enjoyed the Cannibal Corpse and Autopsy records, and I know those records are very acclaimed, especially the Autopsy one. I thought the Obituary record has more of a buzzsaw to it, has more of a bite to it, and I think Obituary don't get nearly enough attention for being such a classic name. And while I love Autopsy and while I especially love Cannibal Corpse, and both of those records kick ass, those are great recommendations too, nothing bad to say about them, I just found myself coming out of the other side thinking that Obituary modernized their style in the cleanest way and built upon that while still making just a kick-ass old school death metal record. As I was going through this year, there were some records that I had forgotten a little bit about that I really loved at the time, but just didn't remember how great they were until I went back for a re-listening, Abyssalworms' Kingdom of Decadence being one of them. I'll tell you one thing, this is another project that just has such little information about it, and this is probably the record on the list that I have the least to say about, which is funny enough. It just is a great death grind record. It's not reinventing the wheel, it's not polishing anything, it's not tweaking anything, and in fact, this is an EP, and I believe it might be the only considered EP on this list, but this record is in and out before it ever gets cumbersome. It hits KO after KO with fast-paced, frantic, manic riffs, great percussion, and it doesn't pack any filler into it. A redemption story this year was Mother by Veil of Maya. So y'all probably know that I am a little bit critical of Veil of Maya's more recent output. I am a much bigger fan of the deathcore era of Veil of Maya, specifically Eclipse. I think that's my favorite deathcore record, period. But I think that this record just takes their technological, djenty, proggy side to the next level. And I think it's very well mixed, and I think a lot of people aren't going to like just how clean it does come out the other side sounding, but I personally, as like a metalcore and djent fan, I've come to not only appreciate Veil of Maya a lot more in their later years, but I have actually grown a massive affinity for this record. This is one of the metalcore records that I went back to the most this year. I think it's amazingly written, I think it's heavily technical, but it knows when it should play it back a little bit and not be too technical and take away from the fact of just making a good quality catchy song. The choruses are on point, the clean vocals are on point, the harsh vocals are on point, and even though it is a very sanitized and mechanical mix, I think it doesn't really take away from the listening experience, and in fact with how electronic and technical Veil of Maya have become, I think it only works in their favor. I'm probably gonna mispronounce this because I have since it came out. Hostal with Lev Doden, and I probably butchered that. This is an international band from a variety of Scandinavian countries, and they burst on the scene with this debut studio-length album, and it blew me away. It's their own homage to 1990s black metal, and in their own words, the worship of death and the worship of the lords of death, and it really does pack a punch with that dark incantation, black magic sort of black metal that just feels and reeks of that evil and that fast-paced playing. I love the vocals on this thing. I love the playing on this thing. Black metal obviously has a lot of different ways that you can write it and variations to how you can write it. They definitely take the let's go all in on the evil train, and it just bleeds through in every single way. And I honestly just cannot wait to see where this band goes from here, because I genuinely mean it when I say that this band has the tightness and the chemistry of a band that's been together far longer than they have. And I have no clue if that means they've been together as a band before. I'm not entirely sure of the history of that, but this record kicks fucking dick in, dude. Similarly to Vapor Chamber by Parallax Occlusion on Debimur Morty Productions, which they are one of my favorite labels. They just don't fucking miss. They make so many bangers. They churn out these bangers. And Parallax Occlusion, this is a compilation of all of their releases up until that point. It rakes in at about an hour's worth of material with some of the most choking and asphyxiating death metal that you'll hear this year. I've been very harsh about the modern OSDM revival, but this project is doing it great. Crushing riffs, great mix to it, very bassy, not really distorted or too noisy, just pounding away at you like a hammer and a nail. It is a lot of material, so you have to be into it, and within the first 10 or so minutes, you will get a good grasp of if you're going to enjoy the rest of this record, but if you do enjoy it, you're in for a thrill ride. Highly suggest it. And just like that, we're in the top 5. Spore, Autumn, Yugi with However It Still Moves, coming out of Chile. They are a fantastic death doom band, more on the doomier side, more on the sludgy side, the murky, trudging through a fucking swamp with creatures on your back and eyes staring at you through the moss. It is that type of thing, and they live up to the sort of Lovecraftian vibe that they are crafting here. It feels like this thing has been rotting away for thousands of years and is some interdimensional entity coming to kick your dick in. You definitely have to like the more slow-paced doom and death metal, but if you do like it, this thing is a treat. Really got gripped by the atmosphere of this thing, really got pulled in by the weight of this thing. It's extremely choking. It just has that iron grip that doesn't let you go until the end. Nocturnal Vampiric Bewitchment by Azathoth's Dream. The most recent record on this list, and one that is blowing me away so much that it's in my top 5. I've been listening to this so much recently. This is self-proclaimed vampiric black metal, and while you would think it would sound, you know, dark and evil and macabre, it certainly has that vibe to it, but I think this thing sounds sad as fuck. Like, I feel like this feels more like a lament, like a vampire sitting in a mansion that has been, you know, alone and abandoned for thousands of years, and he lost everyone he ever loved and has watched generations come and go. Like, it seems so depressing. A lament is the best way that I can phrase it. It just feels like it's cloaked in this darkness and this sorrow for life, and I don't really find this record to be creeping or haunting or evil. I just think it sounds extremely sad, and that atmosphere affected me more than many atmospheric black metal records this year, and that is probably one of the genres I followed the most closely this year, so that is saying a lot. Number 3 is Heavener by Inventanime. Y'all know that I love some progressive metalcore and gent music, and I know they are being praised constantly, but I just have to join the bandwagon. Inventanime are being praised because they're like the fucking Attack on Titan of anime, meaning they get praised for a good reason, and that is high quality. This thing is one of the tightest records I've heard this year from any genre. The proficiency and the efficient way that they write these riffs, and it's so efficient ethereal and floaty. It feels like Disassociation, the album. Beautifully rich with these sprawling soundscapes across this entire thing. It's gorgeous in just about any way that you can describe it, and any word and adjective that I would use would circle back to the fact that this is just a pretty, amazingly written, really well strung together album that is very much worth your time, and I think the emotions of it, the sheer emotions of it, will pierce you. Moonthoth with Cisco is my number 2 record of the year. This is a Polish black metal project that I stumbled upon and it took my breath away. The month it released, I could not stop listening to this thing. With a style of black metal that is a little difficult to describe, because at face value, it is a pretty straightforward black metal record with a lot of atmospheric tinges to it. But the way that I described it when I first reviewed it way back when it released is this thing piles so much weight on you that it feels like a rubber band is being tied around your whole body, tighter and tighter and tighter, until you literally feel like you're about to pop. This is an extremely tense listening experience. It's discomforting in the amount of tension that it builds, and I do think that every single track here has an excellent amount of payoff and richness to the textures, to the way it's written, and I just don't know how to express how tense it feels from start to finish, and it mounts on that in such an intelligent way while still not straying away from the initial hallmarks of the black metal style that it's pulling from. And I don't think I need to be the one to tell you that Polish black metal is notoriously heavy, it's rich, it has a lot of buzzsaw to it. They also write some of the most emotional black metal that you will hear. And finally, my number 1 record of the year, Jigo Kuen by Vandal. Much like Fester Decay, this is another project coming out of Japan, and I fucking love this thing. I'm a geek, I'm a fanboy when it comes to describing this record or just listening to this record. It puts a dumb smile on my face. I have not heard a black metal record like this entire year. Black metal from Asia usually will take on such a different timbre than you would expect from like the European scene, and everything here pays off tremendously. Fuck being emotional, fuck playing it safe. This thing from start to finish is a rip-roaring experience with so much exhilarating songwriting and musicianship that I can only describe as pulling like all of the best qualities from the Asian black metal scene and putting it into this cryptic, indecipherable wall of black metal noise. This thing rarely slows down, this thing rarely takes its foot off the gas. Some of the craziest, most interesting black metal vocals I have heard this year, some of the best and surprisingly catchiest black metal riffs I've heard this year, wonderful production, very dense, very impenetrable. I just love this thing to bits, and I stumbled upon it, and I'm fucking glad I did. But that's enough for me. What are your guys' favorite records of 2023 from the metal department or otherwise? Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.